Hello, I'm Ilash Levinsky and you're watching Break the Fake. They make them, we break them, and tell you everything you need to know. Anyone remember that old self-help classic called How to Win Friends and Influence People? Well, today we're apparently looking at a new version called How to Lose Friends and Influence No One at All. Dale Carnegie would surely not approve of this one. Now, what we need to know is that 3 years ago, Ukraine was attacked by Russia. Russia was the aggressor, Ukraine was the victim. Following nonsensical demands from the Kremlin, such as roll back NATO to 1997 borders, denazify Ukraine, yada yada yada, Russia moved in, soon committing war crimes by the thousands. Surely, you know the story, right? Now, originally the Russians thought they would capture Kiev in 3 days, but they botched it. And speaking of botched efforts, the West initially believed the Russians, with the Biden team even offering Zelensky a ride, to which he said, thanks but no thanks, because we need ammunition instead. In doing so, he created an absolute classic Chad Zelensky versus Virgin West moment, at least until the West finally got its act together. Now, fast forward to 2025, and how things have changed. Ukraine defeated Russia's navy in the Black Sea using just drones, and then seized a small chunk of Russia from which it still cannot be dislodged. Ukraine fought back against overwhelming odds for 3 long years. So, how come we're seemingly back to square one, where Zelensky is still the Chad, but now the US, and not Europe, are the soy boys? In this parallel reality that the new Washington administration has seemingly brought to life, Russia is not to be condemned too much. War crimes are a footnote in the story. Zelensky, not Putin, is the dictator, and it's okay to put pressure on your friends while dangling prospects of cooperation before your foe. Here is how Ukrainians themselves see this, brought to you by online cartoonist, the one and only Free Oneist.
Україно, я прийшов, щоб нарешті покласти край цій війні. Невже ви надаєте нам військову підтримку, яка покладе край російській окупації? Ні, набагато краще. Невже це гарантії безпеки та покарання Росії за її злочини? Краще. Це унікальна нагода вирішити всі проблеми. Справді? І як саме? Все чесно. Ви віддаєте нам половину ваших ресурсів, а Росії половину вашої території. Всі задоволені, війна закінчена, я досяг миру. Підпишіть. А що отримуємо ми? Ваші інтереси в угоду не входять. Тоді ні, дякую. Як недалекоглядно з вашого боку нехтувати такою чудовою угодою. Зрозумійте, щоб досягти миру, кожна із сторін має піти на поступки. І на які поступки йде Росія? Ну, припинить вас вбивати. Мабуть, поки що. Це не дуже схоже на справедливий мир і гарантії безпеки. Якщо вам потрібен мир, то чому ж ви почали війну з Росією? Що? Ми не починали війну. На нас напала Росія, а ми стали захищати свою землю і своє життя. А про життя росіян ви не подумали? Що? Послухайте, поки вони захоплювали ваші землі, вбивали вас, катували та викрадали ваших дітей.
Still not convinced? Okay, so here's the latest. US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff told the media, and I quote with considerable dismay, "The war didn't need to happen. It was provoked. It doesn't necessarily mean it was provoked by the Russians." End of quote. There we go again. Is the USA turning into the USSA now? Because this is exactly what the Kremlin has been saying over and over again. NATO was expanding, we felt afraid, so war crimes. That makes sense? Also, Witkoff says there is a solution at the table, the Istanbul Protocol Agreement. Another quote, "We came very, very close to signing something, and I think we'll be using that framework as a guidepost to get a peace deal done," said Mr. Witkoff. He also added that this would make for an amazing day. Oh, an amazing day for whom exactly? I can think of a few people, and guess what? They're all in Moscow. Marine Le Pen, the ever-reliable Kremlin sympathizer in the heart of Europe, is back to remind us that isolating Russia is a terrible, terrible idea. According to her, the real villain isn't Moscow with its tanks rolling across sovereign borders, it's the United States. Yeah, of course it is. In her latest masterclass in revisionist history, Le Pen declares that the United States has essentially built a new Berlin Wall on Russia's borders. No mention, of course, of who actually built the original one, or who invaded Ukraine, or who bombs civilians on a daily basis. No, in Le Pen's world, NATO's mere presence near Russia is the real act of aggression, while Putin's war is just a natural reaction, like a bear lashing out after being rudely awakened.
Est-ce que vous croyez que l'Occident a mécompris président Poutine?
Non, je crois que l'ancienne administration américaine, en réalité, a mis le mur de Berlin sur roulette pour le disposer aux frontières de la Russie. Donc c'était l'intérêt des États-Unis. Est-ce que c'était l'intérêt des pays de l'Union européenne? La réponse est non. Voilà, nous n'avons aucune raison de mener une nouvelle forme de guerre froide à la Russie. Aucune raison. On a pris des accords avec la Russie à la fin de la Seconde Guerre mondiale et ces accords, ils ont été brisés puisque les États-Unis n'ont eu de cesse depuis un certain nombre d'années, au travers de l'OTAN, de militariser la frontière, les pays qui sont à la frontière de la Russie. Donc ça a été ressenti, je pense, par la Russie comme une forme d'hostilité. Et moi, je ne suis pas pour la montée comme ça des conflits, la montée de l'hostilité, la vision belliciste. Je crois que ce sont des provocations qui entraînent évidemment une réaction. Bon, l'Ukraine fait partie de la zone d'influence russe. C'est un fait. Comme le Canada fait partie de la zone d'influence américaine.
And just in case you thought she couldn't get any bolder than that, she then casually asserted that Ukraine is part of Russia's sphere of influence, much like Canada is part of a US sphere of influence. A fascinating comparison there, except for the minor detail that Washington isn't bombing Ottawa, annexing its provinces, or kidnapping Canadian children en masse. But perhaps Le Pen simply prefers a history with a nostalgic touch. After all, Putin doesn't want to rebuild the Berlin Wall. His dream is the Iron Curtain, the one that sealed off half of Europe after the West sold Poland and its neighbors to Stalin at Yalta. That little historical betrayal? It's still a bedtime fantasy for Putin and his admirers, and apparently for some in Paris as well. Sergei Lavrov, Russia's Minister of Pseudo-Diplomacy and Foreign Land Acquisition, has once again graced the world with his deep humanitarian concerns. This time he is worried about the Western economy. Yes, he really is. According to him, all those billions going to Ukraine should be spent on developing countries in need.
И, безусловно, вопиющим примером служит режим Зеленского, который поглощает, ну или поглощал, по крайней мере, сотни и сотни миллиардов долларов военной помощи, которые, конечно, могли бы быть потрачены на жизненно важные программы содействия развитию по всему миру, прежде всего в Африке.
How touching. The same Lavrov who represents a regime that loots entire cities, razes them to the ground, and then complains about Western aid to Ukraine. The same Russia that treats its own regions outside Moscow and St Petersburg like economic wastelands, where roads are a luxury and running water is optional. But sure, let's take financial advice from the people who turned the ruble into monopoly money, and whose biggest export after oil is fleeing billionaires and millionaires. If the Kremlin were really concerned about global poverty, it could start by not invading countries and blowing up their infrastructure. Or, here is a wild idea. Maybe stop looting Ukrainian grain and pretend it's part of some great humanitarian mission? But no, Lavrov would rather play the role of a concerned global citizen, while his boss redraws borders in blood. And with this we conclude this edition of Break the Fake. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and features.